It'll change the complexion of the series, but it changed the complexion of this game, specifically in that fourth quarter when Ant-Man is getting off, scoring 16 of his 30-plus on the evening. What did you see from Ant-Man in that moment?
Well, I just saw a guy that wasn't waiting on anybody. We saw Anthony Edwards, who we thought he is, right? A special individual, and that's what he get paid the big bucks for, to take over games like this and protect his crib.
Today is Mother's Day, and so I just wanted to win for my mom, and it was just that simple.
Was she on your mind all day today? Or
For sure,
yeah.
for sure, yeah. I couldn't lose this game for her, for sure.
Nobody expected Minnesota to walk into this matchup looking this dangerous. A lot of people thought the Timberwolves would struggle the second things got messy, especially after the injury news around Ant-Man. But somehow, this team keeps pulling off stuff that feels unreal. Ant comes back way earlier than expected, the roster looks patched together, and they still walk into San Antonio and steal Game 1 like they planned it the whole time.
I know you've seen Ant in these before, but with almost a season on the line here, and to see him come through like that, just how do you sum up what he gave you?
It was awesome. He was special. This is what he loves. This is what he lives for. Not just big games, but big moments.
Mike Conley is out there at 39 running the offense. Terrence Shannon Jr. gets thrown into a huge spot, and somehow the Wolves still find a way to control the moment. It's starting to feel like this squad has some weird luck mixed with serious confidence, because nothing about that setup was supposed to work this smoothly. The crazy part is Minnesota wasn't even controlling the game for most of the night. San Antonio looked comfortable early, Wemby was shutting everything down around the rim, and the energy inside the building felt like the Spurs were getting ready to take over completely. Every time the Wolves tried to attack the paint, it turned into a disaster. Wemby was flying around, blocking shots from everywhere, changing possessions before they could even develop. In the first half alone, he was stacking blocks at a ridiculous pace, making Minnesota look nervous anytime they got close to the basket. But then Chris Finch and the coaching staff switched things up at exactly the right time. That adjustment changed the entire flow of the game. Instead of letting Wemby camp in the paint and control everything defensively, the Wolves started pulling him into uncomfortable spots and forcing him to react. Suddenly, the Spurs' defense didn't look nearly as scary, and Minnesota started finding clean openings they couldn't get earlier. That's usually what decides playoff games at this level. Talent matters, but the team that adapts faster usually survives. And in this game, the Wolves figured out the puzzle before San Antonio could respond.
Jaden, this is VC. Can you tell us what will it take for you guys to win Game 5?
Stay together. How this same as this game. Like, we was down. We go through adversity. It don't matter like when the time of the game is that we're going through it. Just staying together, staying confident. And whoever's night it is, if like tonight is Ant's night, we're gonna feed the high hand. And it don't matter. It's the playoffs. Whoever does good. If you do bad, suck it up, and you just got to move to the next one, just win the game.
Wemby came out looking like a complete defensive nightmare from the opening minutes. He already had 6 blocks in the first quarter because Minnesota kept attacking the rim again and again instead of settling down. The Wolves were trying to force their way downhill, but San Antonio was basically begging them to shoot from outside. Devin Vassell was rotating over crazy early, completely ignoring Jalen Clark sitting in the corner. That gave Wemby freedom to roam around the paint like a free safety, just waiting to erase anything near the basket. Every drive looked risky because he was covering so much ground so fast. And honestly, that's the whole Spurs defensive setup right now. Their perimeter defenders play super aggressive because they know Wemby is sitting behind everything ready to clean up mistakes. Guys are gambling for steals, crashing into cutters, and overhelping without panic because they trust him to fix the damage at the rim. Look at how early Champagnie rotates down on this possession. He gives Gobert a strong shove in the back and doesn't even care that Terrence Shannon Jr. has moved into open space on the wing. The focus is stopping the big man first and letting Wemby handle the chaos behind the play. That kind of defense can make an offense freeze up fast because every lane suddenly feels crowded. But Minnesota slowly started seeing weak spots in it. Even with Wemby guarding Reid at times, the Spurs couldn't fully shut everything down. Chris Finch and the Wolves coaching staff noticed how aggressive San Antonio was rotating, and they finally made a smart counter adjustment. This next play shows exactly what changed the game. Gobert sets a Gortat screen and rolls directly into Wembanyama's path, creating traffic and forcing Wemby to deal with bodies instead of freely flying around the paint. That tiny adjustment started changing the entire rhythm of the Spurs defense. At first, the timing between Julius, Randle, and Gobert looked completely off. They almost turned the ball over because both guys seemed confused on where the screen was supposed to happen. But even through the messy execution, Minnesota accidentally discovered something that kept helping them later in the game. Instead of trying to challenge Wemby directly at the rim every possession, they started treating him like a rebounder that needed to be sealed off first. Anytime a Wolves guard attacked the paint, somebody's job became putting a body on Wemby and moving him away from the play before he could explode over for a block. Watch Julius Randle on these possessions. It almost looks like he's about to back someone down in the post, but that's not really the goal. He's basically turning himself into a human wall just to keep Wemby occupied for a second or two. That tiny delay opened huge driving lanes for Ant and the other guards. Instead of letting Wemby roam freely across the paint, Minnesota forced him to wrestle with bodies constantly. It wasn't pretty basketball, but it disrupted the entire rhythm of San Antonio's defense. And yeah, on one of those late possessions, it easily could have been called a foul. Julius drives toward the lane, Gobert slides over like he's setting another screen, and then Julius just stays attached to Wemby almost the whole play. The refs let it go because playoff basketball usually gets more physical late in games, especially during a huge possession like that. Minnesota took advantage of every inch the officials allowed. Still, even with all those adjustments, you're not completely stopping Wemby. He's too long, too quick, and recovers faster than most players his size. He's still going to make crazy defensive plays no matter what you throw at him. That's why Reid becomes such an important piece in this matchup. Having a big who can stretch the floor changes everything for Minnesota. On this play, Jaden McDaniels drives hard into the paint and pulls Wemby toward him. The second Wemby commits, Reid is left standing wide open outside and giving a near 40% three-point shooter. That kind of space is dangerous every single time. Then the Spurs answered with another adjustment of their own. It really turned into a chess match between both coaching staffs. San Antonio started putting Wemby on Terrence Shannon Jr. instead, mainly because Shannon hasn't been a reliable outside shooter during these playoffs. That let Wemby stay closer to the paint again, without worrying as much about getting punished from deep. Once San Antonio moved Wemby onto Terrence Shannon Jr., Minnesota instantly looked for another counter move. The Spurs were treating Anthony Edwards like the biggest threat on the floor, refusing to help off him at all. They didn't want Ant touching the ball in space, so whenever he came near a screen, defenders stayed glued to him instead of rotating over. That opened the floor for Terrence Shannon Jr. to attack downhill with speed. The second he got a step on his defender, the lane was completely open because the Spurs defense was so focused on containing Ant. Shannon took advantage of that space over and over, getting clean drives without Wemby sitting directly in front of him waiting at the rim. Minnesota also kept experimenting with ways to drag Wemby farther away from the paint. One of the smartest sequences came when they ran Ant over an Iverson screen. San Antonio still refused to send help because they were terrified of giving Edwards room to operate. Wemby stayed disciplined and didn't overcommit chasing the action, which honestly showed how patient he is defensively. But even with that, the Wolves still found an opening. Stephon Castle was trying to front Julius Randle on the inside, and during the confusion, Randle basically turned into a moving screen for his own teammate. That little split-second collision completely broke the coverage and opened up an easy layup at the rim. The Wolves also started using more perimeter screening actions, specifically designed to pull Wemby outside. Flare screens became a huge part of that strategy, especially when Reid was involved. Reid's shooting ability forces defenders to respect him, so when Wemby steps out toward the perimeter, the paint suddenly looks way less crowded. That changes everything for Minnesota's guards, because they finally have room to attack without seeing a 7-foot giant waiting under the basket. Honestly, it would make sense for the Wolves to lean even harder into those actions moving forward because they clearly created problems for San Antonio's defensive setup. And credit has to go to Chris Finch for recognizing all of this in real time. The adjustments completely shifted the game once Minnesota stopped attacking the Spurs defense in predictable ways. But beyond the strategy, the wildest part of the whole night might have been Anthony Edwards even being on the floor at all after the injury scare. A week ago, Anthony Edwards' knee looked completely twisted up, and people were seriously wondering if he'd even be available anytime soon. Fast forward to this game, and somehow he's back on the court moving like he never left. Not only did he play, he ended up looking like Minnesota's best offensive player for stretches of the night. That's what made the performance so shocking. He wasn't just standing around as a decoy either. He was creating shots, reading the defense, and knocking down tough buckets under pressure. On one possession, San Antonio completely miscommunicated the coverage. Ant stopped on a dime and drilled a deep three right in their faces. Even while clearly not at full strength, he still finished with 18 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and a block in only 25 minutes. What stands out even more is how much attention the Spurs were throwing at him defensively. They were basically running full denial anytime he moved around the perimeter. San Antonio did not want Anthony Edwards touching the ball comfortably, especially with the game tightening up late. And despite playing on a knee that still didn't look fully right, Ant stayed patient instead of forcing reckless shots into traffic. That's where his growth really showed. Earlier in his career, he probably tries to challenge Wemby head-on every possession. In this game, he picked smarter spots. Whenever he saw Wemby waiting near the paint, he immediately started making the extra pass. Julius Randle benefited from that multiple times. Ant would drive, force the defense to collapse, notice Wemby lurking around the rim, and quickly kick the ball back out to Randle for open threes. Those reads were huge because they punished San Antonio for loading the paint so aggressively. Randle knocked down some massive shots off those kickouts and kept Minnesota's offense alive when things started slowing down. Then there were the moments where Ant just looked impossible to stay in front of. He hit a smooth, sidestep move after Julian Champagnie tried closing out too aggressively, slipping right through the defenders before they could recover. Minnesota also kept using those perimeter actions to drag Wemby away from the basket, and once that happened, the Spurs suddenly had Harrison Barnes trying to contain Anthony Edwards in space. That's a matchup Minnesota will take every single time, because once Ant gets downhill with room to operate, the defense is usually in trouble fast. One of the coldest moments from the game was Ant going straight at Wemby one-on-one and talking the entire way back down the floor after scoring. That energy is exactly why fans connect with him so much. He doesn't back away from big matchups even when he's clearly not fully healthy. You can tell his explosiveness still isn't where it normally is. And realistically, Minnesota probably isn't getting peak Anthony Edwards for this series, with the knee still bothering him. During the regular season, some of those drives would have ended with violent dunks at the rim. On a couple plays in this game, you could actually see him adjust in midair and avoid putting too much pressure on the leg. But even without full athleticism, Ant still found ways to control the game. That's what makes his performance so important for Minnesota moving forward. Instead of forcing highlight plays every possession, he slowed down, read the defense, and attacked smarter. He still pressured the rim enough to collapse defenders, and that opened opportunities for everyone else around him. If he can keep producing like this while managing the injury, it changes the entire ceiling of the Wolves during this run. And if they eventually get more healthy bodies back into the rotation, especially Io, that depth becomes even more dangerous despite missing Dante DiVincenzo. Jaden McDaniels also deserves a ton of attention because his offensive game looks way more polished now. For years, people mainly talked about his defense and length, but this season, he's added real confidence as a scorer. At 6'10" with that massive wingspan, defenders already struggle contesting his shots, and now he's using that size much more aggressively in the mid-range area. On one possession, he gives Devin Vassell a quick shot fake, rises up calmly, and drills the jumper right over him without much resistance. There's almost nothing defenders can do when he gets comfortable in those spots. Then he started mixing in even tougher moves. He attacked the baseline, got cut off initially, spun away from the pressure, and still finished clean over a smaller defender. McDaniels ended the night with 16 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 defensive plays. But the bigger takeaway was how confident he looked creating offense. Even in pick-and-roll situations, he looked under control. Coming off a Gobert screen, he attacked the big defender directly, used a quick shot fake to force a flyby contest, and finished easily in the paint. Those are advanced scoring reads that make Minnesota way harder to defend now compared to earlier seasons. And then there was that finish late in the game that honestly might have been the cleanest bucket of the entire night. McDaniels drives in, sees Wemby waiting with those long arms stretched all the way out, and still somehow floats the ball perfectly over him. That's not an easy shot at all, especially against someone who covers as much space defensively as Wembanyama. Most players panic in that situation and either force a bad layup or kick the ball back out. McDaniel stayed calm, adjusted in the air, and finished with ridiculous touch right over elite rim protection. That play alone showed how much confidence Minnesota had built by the second half. Now shifting over to Julius Randle, his role becomes even bigger anytime Anthony Edwards is limited or off the floor. When Ant is playing, Randle can settle into that secondary scorer role and attack defenses that are already tilted towards stopping Edwards. But when Ant sits, the offense starts running directly through Julius, and that responsibility changes everything. Even if the shooting numbers weren't super efficient in this game, he still controlled a huge part of Minnesota's offense with his physicality and decision-making. He finished with 21 points, 10 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal, while constantly forcing San Antonio's defense into difficult rotations. The important part wasn't just the scoring either. Randle did a strong job recognizing where the Spurs were overcommitting defensively. On multiple possessions, San Antonio collapsed hard into the paint, trying to crowd Gobert and stop the interior action. Julius kept reading those rotations correctly and firing passes to open teammates before the defense could recover. One sequence really showed it perfectly. Keldon Johnson slides down early trying to box out Gobert, and Randle instantly notices the weak side opening up. Instead of forcing a contested shot, he throws the pass over the top to Jalen Clark, who suddenly has space to attack. And once Clark catches it, the entire Spurs defense is scrambling. The closeout comes flying at him way too aggressively because the defender has so much ground to cover. That gives Clark an easy downhill lane where he can either float it over Wemby or toss a lob depending on how the big man reacts. Wemby can't fully defend both options at once, and Minnesota started exploiting those split-second decisions throughout the game. San Antonio also still doesn't really have a perfect defensive matchup for Julius Randle physically. Keldon Johnson competes hard and brings toughness, but giving up size against Randle over and over becomes exhausting. Julius is around 6'9" and built like a power forward that can still handle the ball comfortably in isolation. Even on possessions where the Spurs initially defended him well, he was still able to create difficult mid-range shots simply because of his strength and touch. There was one play where Keldon actually forced him into a tough fadeaway, but Randle still elevated cleanly and knocked it down anyway. Once Minnesota started going directly into those middle isolations for him, the Spurs had a hard time stopping the action without sending extra help. When the game started getting tight late, Minnesota made it very clear who they trusted most with the ball. Everything slowed down and turned into Julius Randle isolations. That's the security blanket for this team right now at the end of games. They trust him to read the defense correctly every time down the floor. If defenders collapse too hard, he'll make the pass. If they stay home on shooters, he's strong enough to bully his way into a tough bucket himself. And one of those shots late in the game was completely ridiculous. The defense actually forced him into a difficult look, but he still somehow faded away and dropped it right through the net anyway. That kind of shot can completely kill momentum for the other team, because there's almost nothing you can do defensively when a player converts something that difficult. And then there's Terrence Shannon Jr., who brought nonstop energy the entire night. Even if the shooting efficiency wasn't perfect, his impact went way beyond the box score. The second he gets out in transition, the game instantly speeds up. Defenders start panicking because he attacks the rim with real force and doesn't hesitate once he sees an opening. What stood out most was that he didn't force everything recklessly either. Earlier in the season, he probably challenges Wemby every single possession, no matter what. In this game, you could see him making smarter reads. On one fast break, he notices Wemby already waiting near the rim and immediately swings the ball over to Mike Conley instead of forcing a bad shot. That kind of decision-making matters a lot in playoff games. He also brought toughness on the defensive side. Taking a charge in the second half completely shifted the energy for Minnesota, and plays like that are huge momentum boosters during physical games. Shannon finished with 16 points, 5 rebounds, and an assist while playing 35 hard minutes. Yeah, Wemby blocked him a couple times at the rim, but that never stopped him from attacking again on the next possession. That confidence is part of what makes him dangerous. The biggest problem for San Antonio is his speed. Once he gets downhill, defenders struggle keeping him out of the paint without fouling. He constantly pressured the rim, absorbed contact, and earned trips to the free throw line because of how aggressive he stayed. Going 6 for 8 at the line ended up being important production for Minnesota. And after the game, Shannon made things even more entertaining with his comments about Wemby. He basically sent a warning that eventually he's going to finish a dunk on him no matter how many shots get blocked first. His mindset was simple. Wemby would have to stop every single drive perfectly because Shannon plans on continuing to attack without fear. Reid keeps proving why he's one of the most valuable matchup problems Minnesota has. Having a player who's around 6'9", built strong, and still capable of dribbling, passing, and shooting comfortably is a massive advantage in today's NBA. Especially now, with so many teams leaning into size and physicality again, players like Naz become incredibly difficult to guard. He can play like a big man near the rim one possession and then handle the ball like a wing on the next. That versatility constantly forces defenses into uncomfortable decisions. A couple of his plays in this game really showed why he changes everything for the Wolves offensively. On one drive, he attacks downhill and finishes through contact over Luke Kornet with impressive control at the rim. Then later in transition, he brings the ball up himself, hits a hesitation move into a crossover, and goes directly at Wemby before finishing at the basket anyway. Those are the kinds of possessions that frustrate defenders, because most players his size don't move that fluidly with the ball in space. Wemby usually recovers fast enough to erase mistakes around the rim, but Naz was making him react in ways he clearly didn't enjoy. And the other huge factor is spacing. Reid forces Wemby to leave the paint and respect the perimeter because he can knock down shots from outside consistently. That changes the geometry of the floor completely for Minnesota's guards and slashers. It's also why Naz ends up closing games so often for the Wolves. In late-game situations, they trust the flexibility he brings offensively, especially compared to more traditional lineups. That doesn't mean Rudy Gobert had a bad game at all, though. Defensively, Gobert was outstanding again. Throughout these playoffs, he's looked way more comfortable staying involved in high-level matchups instead of getting targeted off the floor like critics claimed in previous years. His energy on the glass also gave Minnesota extra possessions all night. There was one rebound where he basically powered Wemby backward with pure strength before grabbing the board cleanly. He also played well off Anthony Edwards in pick-and-roll action, finding easy scoring chances near the basket when the defense collapsed elsewhere. Meanwhile, Wemby had one of his rougher offensive nights statistically. He finished with 11 points, 5 assists, and 3 turnovers while shooting just 5 for 1-7 from the field and missing every three-point attempt. Even with the elite defensive impact early in the game, Minnesota's adjustments slowly made things much harder for him offensively as the night went on. And honestly, that kept becoming the story of the game. Rudy Gobert's defense was so disruptive that both Jokic earlier in the playoffs and now Wemby started settling for outside shots instead of attacking inside comfortably. The problem for San Antonio was that Wemby just never found a rhythm from deep. Gobert kept taking away clean looks near the rim, forcing tougher decisions, possession after possession. That defensive pressure completely changed how the Spurs wanted to run their offense. And major credit has to go to Mike Conley too, because at 38 years old, he looked incredibly composed in a game where Minnesota badly needed stability. He seriously outplayed De'Aaron Fox for long stretches, which is wild considering the salary gap between those two players right now. Conley is making around $1 million, while Fox is earning superstar money, yet Conley controlled the pace better, made smarter reads, and knocked down huge shots when Minnesota needed them most. He finished 4 of 7 from three-point range, and every one of those shots felt massive because the Wolves' offense desperately needed reliable spacing with all the injuries piling up. Now, realistically, Minnesota probably does not want to depend this heavily on a 38-year-old point guard every night. That's just the reality of the situation right now, though. With key players banged up, Conley has to steady the offense, and in Game 1, he absolutely delivered. He stayed calm under pressure, avoided careless mistakes, and kept the Wolves organized even when the game started getting chaotic late. And then there was Bones Highland coming off the bench, bringing instant energy. One thing nobody expected was Bones actually giving quality defensive minutes too. Usually people talk about his offense and scoring bursts, but he made a couple hustle plays that mattered a lot in this game. He looked like a real spark plug every time Minnesota needed momentum. Now, to be fair, the Wolves also nearly handed this game away at the end. There were a couple ugly possessions where they completely lost control and basically gifted San Antonio extra chances. One turnover especially looked brutal live. The Spurs got a clean look afterward, and for a second it honestly felt like the shot was going in. The arena was ready to explode, Minnesota looked tense, and somehow the ball still stayed out. That ended up being the break the Wolves needed to escape with the win. So despite the injuries, despite Ant clearly not being fully healthy, despite the strange rotations and all the chaos, Minnesota still walked into San Antonio and stole Game 1 on the road. This team keeps finding ways to survive ugly situations, and that's a dangerous sign for the rest of the playoffs. They're physical, adaptable, confident, and honestly just entertaining to watch right now because every game feels unpredictable. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, show some love by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and subscribing to Ball Stories for more breakdowns like this all throughout the playoffs and NBA season. The support seriously helps the channel grow and lets these videos keep coming consistently. Also, share the video with somebody who's been locked into playoff basketball lately, because this postseason has already been completely insane. Appreciate everybody for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.